Get ready for a magic trick, because in this video, I'm going to turn this quilt into 3 wall hangings using facing to bind the edges. Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters from quiltingismytherapy.com. In this video, we're going to see how we can finish our quilts using the facing technique. Not only is it easy to do, it also gives the quilt a borderless finish, making it perfect for wall hangings. So I have this quilted panel from the Negative Spaces Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video series. And when I designed the panel for that class, I designed it so that it could either stay as a whole quilt or be cut into thirds and used as a wall hanging. So the first thing I need to do is to trim up this panel. And I'm simply just going to cut right along that line. Using the facing technique to finish your quilt just gives you a slightly different look from the binding. Of course, you can do this on quilts of all sizes, but you tend to see this more on wall hangings. Once that's trimmed and squared up, it's time to get my pieces for the facing. So first, I'm going to need 4 squares. Now the fabric that you use for your facing can really be anything you want, because it's going to be brought around to the back. You're not even going to be able to see it from the front. And then I'm going to need 4 strips. I've cut them out so that they're a couple inches shorter than each side of my wall hanging. So I have 2 shorter pieces and 2 longer pieces. But before I can start assembling my facing, I'm going to get my iron and press these. I'm going to start with the squares and I'm going to press them in half diagonally, just like so, to make a triangle like this. And of course, I'm going to do the same with all the squares. Then with my other strips, I'm going to also press those wrong sides together, lining up the longer edges to give it that nice crisp fold. And I'm going to repeat that with all the strips. Now I have this panel for sale on our website, so if you want to try quilting along with me in the video series and then turning it into a wall hanging, then you can definitely check that out. Just click the link in the description box below or visit quiltingismytherapy.com. Once all those pieces are pressed, it's time to start assembling our quilt. So I'm going to grab my wall hanging and I'm going to place it right side up. Next, I'm going to place the triangles in each of the corners, aligning the raw edges with the edges of the quilt. Listen, I know this feels so wrong, but I promise it's going to be so right when we're done. Then I'll pin those in place. I don't normally like taking the time to pin, but it will help keep it in place since I'm sewing through so many layers of fabric. Once those are in place, it's time to gather my strips and lay them out on top of the quilt and on top of those triangles. And I'm going to align the raw edges with the edge of the quilt. And I'm going to center it on the quilt, and I want to make sure that it overlaps my triangles by at least a little bit. Then just pin it in place and then repeat on the remaining sides. Once I have all those strips in place, all I need to do is grab my sewing machine and sew a seam around all 4 sides. Easy peasy. If you have a walking foot, go ahead and grab it, because it's going to make sewing this on a lot easier. Once that's sewed down, it's time to get the iron and my pins and wrap it around. First, I'm going to trim off the corners just a little bit, just to kind of ease some of that bulk in that area. But be careful not to cut into the sewing line. Then, starting with one side, I'm going to flip the fabric around to the other side. So pulling it around, pushing in that fabric to get that nice crisp corner. Then I'm going to take that strip and pull it back on itself, wrapping it around to the other side of the quilt. Now that fabric is not going to want to stay there, so to help hold it in place, I'm going to use my iron to press it nice and flat, and use my nice sharp pins to pin it in place. The basic idea here is I don't want to see any of this fabric on the front of the wall hanging. And I'm just pinning that strip in place so it doesn't move and it stays right where it needs to be, because next I'm going to hand sew it in place. That's right, we got to do a little bit of hand sewing with this. I don't usually love the hand sewing, but in this case, it's definitely worth the effort. Then I'm going to repeat that on all 4 sides, pulling that fabric around to the back and pressing it in place. This is where we find out just how straight or not my seam is. But the good news is, even if that seam isn't perfectly straight, it's going to be fine. Every once in a while, I like to flip it over and just make sure it's looking right. Perfect. That's exactly what I should be seeing. It's going to look so good. I will say, as I'm doing this, sometimes I feel like that fabric is never going to go where I need it to go. But it will. Just keep pressing, just keep pinning, and eventually it'll stay right where it needs to be. What I love about these pins is that they're nice and sharp, They're thin, they go through all the layers of fabric, and you can even iron right over the top of them. You know, without worrying about having melted plastic all over your quilt. I kind of like to work my way along in little increments, ironing and pinning, and then once it's all pinned, giving it one last kind of looky-loo to make sure everything's where it needs to be. And don't be shy when it comes to using the pins. The more pins you have, the more it stays in place and the easier it is to sew on. The part that I'm really focused on is right here along the edge. Once I've ensured that that fabric is where it needs to be, then I can come back and add more pins along those edges. All right, next I'm gonna flip it over and just kind of take a moment and check it out. I wanna make sure my edges are nice and straight, that fabric is kind of tucked back around so you can't see it, and it's at this point I can make any adjustments that I need to make. Once it's all pinned in place, it's going to be just like we were hand sewing some binding. I'm going to grab a needle and thread and then just hand stitch right along this edge, working my way all the way around the quilt. Now I'm only stitching down the longer edges. These triangles I don't necessarily want to stitch down because they're going to make little pockets that I can use to help hang my quilt later on. And then once all the stitching is in place, you can take those pins out and then hang up your lovely wall hanging. I just like how the facing gives it a different look than your traditional binding. It's a little bit more artsy and it helps show off the whole quilt. So now all that's left to do is to sew this down and repeat with the other two wall hangings. Then the fun part, hanging them on the wall. So what do you think? Does this sound like something you'd like to do on your quilts? Let me know in the comment section below. I'm curious to see if quilters prefer binding or facing for their quilts. And if you want to make the same wall hangings, you can check out that panel by clicking the link in the description box below. Well, I'll be back soon with another quilting tutorial. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.